So we have a proposed rule before us that would, I think almost ridiculously, cause Class 1 railroads moving goods from South Dakota into California to, once they reach the California border, to stop, take off that locomotive, and instead get a new zero-emission locomotive. A zero-emission locomotive which, despite some of the other claims we've had today, let's be clear, are not widely available in the commercial sense today. And in fact, we don't really know when they would be widely available. This is all very aspirational. There's also been some discussion about this cost-benefit analysis. Ms. Arias, give us a sense of the $86 billion impact that your agency calculated. Did that, what number did that put on the delays that would be felt as secondary and tertiary impacts up the supply chain?
Good question. We do not do analysis of secondary impacts to the supply chain. It solely calculates the cost should the UP and BNSF determine that they would need to replace the whole fleet.
Okay, so let's be clear. The assumption of your analysis is that this is not a regulation that impacts California. It's a regulation that impacts the entire United States. Or in essence, any place that's served by the UP and the BNSF. And I know, ma'am, you know enough about their networks to understand how incredibly far-reaching that is.
They have mentioned that they do not prioritize a fleet within the state, so we understand that. And
okay, so California is attempting to make a rule not that governs Californians, but that governs the United States of America. So I want to make sure that I understand what you said, ma'am. We have, because your analysis had a zero cost to supply chain impacts. I want to make sure I'm understanding what you said. Did you say that there's not a single instance of a Class 1 railroad providing you any information on the challenges of securing Tier 4 locomotives? Is that accurate? Not a single instance?
They have not given us any data to indicate what the actual issues are. They have anecdotally told us that there are issues with Tier 4, but every time we ask, we are not given the data as to what the issues are.
Okay, so they have not been forthcoming at all. They just speak in generalities.
They have not.
So if your evidentiary record is that thin, ma'am, how can you possibly promulgate this far-reaching rule that, by your own admission, governs America? I would hope my colleagues, now listen, we don't do it perfectly either, ma'am, but I would hope we would have a little bit heftier evidentiary record before we decided to govern our country with such a far-reaching decision. Mr. Nober, let's turn to you. I've talked a little bit about the constitutional sort of preemption issues. In 30 seconds, sir, what can you tell us?
Well, as I talked about in my testimony, the Interstate Commerce Act is intended specifically to preempt not just state regulation of rail operations, but other federal laws that have the effect of impacting rail operations and regulating them. And that's what would happen here. So you would either have to, the California actions would be, in my opinion, clearly preempted. And if the EPA authorized them, it's really to authorize in use in the state of California. They would have to declare an emergency. They would have to show that there were some other standards that they would have to meet. And then they, at the same time, they would also have to show that that could be harmonized with the Interstate Commerce Act, which I don't think they could. And just if I could add one more thing, in addition to towns being 10 miles apart in South Dakota, major towns are probably 90 miles apart, because that's how far you had to service a steam locomotive.
I yield.